The hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the dim hangar, bouncing off cold steel and hushed breaths. It was well past midnight at Aerodyne Systems, and most of the engineering team stood frozen near the test platform, exhausted and defeated. 3 failed ignition trials in a single week had shaken morale, and the once confident murmurs had turned to murmurs of doubt. Craig Ellison, the company's sharp-suited CEO, paced in front of the rocket engine like a lion irritated by its praise. Incompetence. His pride had taken a hit, and he needed a scapegoat. That's when he spotted Jim Cotter, the night guard, sipping stale coffee near the door, accompanied by a teenager in a faded hoodie and worn sneakers. With a sneer curling on his lips, Craig gestured toward the boy. "If your son's so smart," he mocked, loud enough for the room to hear, "let's see him fix the rocket engine." A laugh rippled across a few tired engineers. Jim shifted uncomfortably, ready to pull his son back, but Leo didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. With quiet steps, he walked toward the massive engine as if he belonged there. No degree, no lab coat, no title, just intuition and something unshakable in his eyes. What happened next wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was silent, methodical, and completely world-shattering. By the time the hum of the engine roared to life, it wasn't just the room that was stunned. Hours later, a call came in, and when Elon Musk's voice cracked, with emotion on speakerphone, no one could believe what they were hearing. He didn't say a word, but every move he made spoke volumes. Leo stood in front of the rocket engine, his hands relaxed at his sides, eyes tracing the contours of the machinery like an artist studying a blank canvas. The room was heavy with disbelief. No one moved, not even Jim, who watched his son with a mixture of dread and awe. It was as if time itself paused to see what this teenager, this nobody, would dare do. He didn't ask questions, didn't fumble. Instead, Leo knelt beside the base of the engine, brushing his fingers lightly across a scorched section of the casing. The engineers exchanged glances, expecting him to poke at random parts or ask where the manual was. He didn't. Instead, he unclipped the pocket flashlight from his belt and started inspecting the lower intake valve. The lead engineer, Dr. Mercer, furrowed his brow. "He's checking the compression chamber," he whispered to a colleague. How the hell would he even know? No answer came. Just the sound of Leo quietly undoing a side panel with a multi-tool he pulled from his backpack. The screws fell into his palm like coins into a slot machine. Craig, standing with arms crossed, scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is ridiculous. Is this a joke?" But no one laughed. In fact, the only sounds in the hangar now were the soft clicks of Leo's work and the subtle creak of metal under stress. As he continued, something changed in the room. The laughter died, the ridicule faded. It wasn't what Leo was doing, it was how he was doing it. He moved with the kind of confidence you couldn't fake, like someone who had taken apart 100 engines before breakfast and put them back together by lunch. Then, he paused. His hand hovered over a secondary turbine bracket, barely visible to most of the engineers without a lift or schematic, and then, just as quickly, he adjusted a misaligned coupler and reseated the valve, in action so precise and subtle it escaped all but the most trained eyes. Dr. Mercer stepped forward. "Wait a second. That might actually..." But before he could finish, Leo straightened, turned to face the group, and calmly asked, "Where's the test ignition control?" A ripple ran through the team. The same kid they were ready to laugh off just spoke with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Jim took a hesitant step forward, torn between pride and panic. But then Leo added, almost as an afterthought, "And you'll want to recheck the coolant pressure valve. There's a microfracture in the regulator housing. That's what's been causing the stall." The room went dead silent. Jim Cotter had never felt so visible in that building before. For over 8 years, he'd worked the graveyard shift at Aerodyne Systems, clocking in after the engineers clocked out, patrolling the silent halls with a flashlight and a clipboard. Most days, he was invisible, a presence to be tolerated, not acknowledged, and that was fine with him. But now, everyone was staring, not at him directly, but at his son. Leo stood at the center of the hangar like he belonged there, his hands calmly dusted with grease and graphite. Jim's heart thundered against his ribs. He didn't know whether to pull Leo away to protect him from humiliation, or to step back and let the boy finish whatever it was he had just started. When Craig Ellison sneered earlier, it hit Jim like a slap. The mockery wasn't new. He'd heard his share of muttered jabs and backhanded compliments over the years, but dragging Leo into it had crossed the line. Still, he hadn't expected his son to accept the challenge. He thought Leo would just laugh it off, shrug, walk away. But that's never really been Leo's way. From the time he was a toddler, Leo had always been quiet, observant. While other kids tore apart their toys, Leo took his apart with a screwdriver and tried to put them back together. Jim remembered the old toaster they'd thrown out when Leo was 8. A week later, the kid handed him warm toast, crispy in perfect hand, just said, "It works now." Back in the hangar, Leo now stood by the control panel, waiting. His earlier comment about the coolant pressure regulator had caught Dr. Mercer's attention. The man leaned in with a frown, squinting at the exact section Leo had pointed out. Jim could see it in the engineer's eyes, the reluctant realization that the kid might actually be right. Jim clenched and unclenched his fists. This was it. This could be a moment of pride, or a brutal public fall. He wanted to shield Leo from the sting of elite dismissal, the kind he himself had grown numb to. But Leo wasn't flinching. He wasn't second-guessing himself either. And as much as it terrified him, Jim realized he had to let go. He caught Dr. Mercer looking back at him. "But your boy?" the engineer asked quietly. Jim nodded. His voice stuck in his throat. Dr. Mercer looked back at Leo, then added under his breath, "He's not guessing." Jim didn't respond. But in that moment, his spine straightened a little. Maybe, just maybe, it was time people stopped looking past the night guard. To the untrained eye, the engine looked flawless, every bolt in place, every weld smooth, every sensor blinking in orderly rhythm. But Leo wasn't looking for what was there. He was searching for what shouldn't be. His fingers skimmed the housing of the left thrust actuator, then paused over a narrow seam almost invisible beneath the shielding, a tiny misalignment, barely more than the width of a fingernail. Without asking permission, he unclipped a panel nestled behind the combustion chamber. The engineers watched in stunned silence. No one had even considered opening that section. It wasn't part of the diagnostics checklist. It wasn't supposed to be touched. But Leo didn't hesitate. Inside, tucked behind a dense grid of fiber optic wiring, was a stabilization gear meant to regulate fuel flow at peak velocity. It was supposed to shift minutely under pressure, maintaining balance during launch, but the gear was jammed lodged by a microscopic burr in the housing. That single imperfection was enough to throw off the engine's timing by a fraction of a second. In aerospace, a fraction of a second could mean disaster. Leo tilted his head, eyes narrowing. His hands worked with a kind of reverent care, like someone restoring an old watch passed down through generations. He pulled a soldering iron from his pack, an old beat-up, and began carefully heating the metal near the obstruction. Craig stepped forward then, voice sharp and performative. "You're tampering with a proprietary engine. Do you even realize the liability?" But Dr. Mercer raised a hand. "Let him finish." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Leo worked for another minute, adjusting the burr, realigning the gear with the precision of a surgeon. Then, with a firm but delicate push, he clicked it back into motion. The engineers heard the soft metallic shift, a rhythm that hadn't been there before. Craig muttered something under his breath, but even he couldn't deny what just happened. What the entire team of MIT grads, former NASA staff, million-dollar consultants had failed to see was spotted by a teenage boy with no access badge and sneakers worn through at the toe. And as Leo closed the panel and stepped back, he said something so casual, it sliced through the room like a scalpel. The gear was over-tightened during installation, probably to meet a noise reduction threshold, but it restricted expansion under high temperature. He wasn't guessing. He knew. The crowd in the hangar still hadn't moved. Leo's quiet command over the machine had left them stunned, but for Jim, it brought something else bubbling to the surface. Memory. The hallway lights dimmed in his mind as he was pulled back, years earlier, to a cluttered basement lit by a single swinging bulb. That was Leo's world. While other kids spent hours on video games or chasing each other around the block, Leo retreated to their damp, unfinished basement part lab. Part sanctuary. Jim remembered walking downstairs one night after a late shift, lunchbox still in hand, and seeing Leo hunched over a disassembled lawnmower engine. He was maybe 11. Not a word was spoken, but the boy's focus was razor-sharp. Eyes narrowed behind dollar store safety glasses, his fingers black with grease. Surrounding him were printouts of old NASA schematics, hand-drawn wiring diagrams, and pages from library books taped to the walls like art. "Where'd you learn all this?" Jim had asked, genuinely baffled. Leo hadn't looked up online, and those books from Grandma's attic. Later that year, Jim came home to find the microwave fixed after months of broken buttons. Then it was the washing machine, the thermostat. Eventually, neighbors began showing up with broken radios, old VCRs, even one guy's electric bike. Leo took them all apart and gave them back better than new, not because he wanted money. He just wanted to understand. What he never had, though, was recognition. His high school teachers brushed him off. Counselors didn't know what to do with a kid who built gyroscopes from junkyard scrap but forgot to turn in English homework. College, it wasn't even a discussion. They barely paid rent as it was, and yet, here they were. That same kid was now standing in one of the most sophisticated aerospace labs in the country, casually correcting an engine team with a combined 200 years of experience. Jim swallowed hard. He had always believed in his son. But belief doesn't always prepare you for the moment the world finally sees what you've known all along. Leo turned from the engine and met his father's eyes. No words passed between them, but something unspoken did. A knowing, a weight, finally, beginning to lift. Craig Ellison stood stiffly near the edge of the hangar floor, his jaw tight, arms folded so hard across his chest it looked like he might fold into himself. For a man used to commanding every room he walked into, tonight was a quiet kind of hell. No one was looking at him anymore. Not since the kid had fixed the engine. The boy hadn't even made a show of it. That's what infuriated Craig the most. No dramatic gestures, no smug glances. Just calm, exacting hands and an observation that had eluded his entire team for months. And now those same engineers, his engineers, were murmuring in awe like kids at a science fair. "All right, that's enough," Craig said, stepping forward. His voice was cold, clipped. "We've entertained the apprentice act. Let's get back to protocol." But no one moved. Dr. Mercer, who had long tiptoed around Craig's temper, glanced up from the diagnostic screen. "Protocol hasn't worked. In 3 weeks, he did. In 20 minutes, what we haven't managed in 30 days. Craig's eyes narrowed. "So now, you take engineering advice from a janitor's kid?" Jim stiffened at that, but said nothing. Leo, standing by the ignition console, simply blinked. "You said I could try," he said softly. "I did." Craig took a few steps closer. "You have no clearance, no credentials. You tampered with a multi-million-dollar engine. Do you have any idea the risk you've put this company in?" The room tensed. But Leo didn't flinch. "I didn't tamper. I corrected a manufacturing oversight. The housing bar wasn't part of the design. Someone forced it during install, probably to hit a spec it wasn't designed for." It wasn't arrogance, it was fact. And that made it worse for Craig. He felt the power slipping away. The narrative he controlled, unraveling. He wasn't just a CEO. He was a figurehead, a symbol of order and vision. And this boy, without even trying, had made him look irrelevant. Craig leaned in close, his voice low. "You think this little stunt makes you a genius? You got lucky. This doesn't mean anything." Leo looked up at him with the quiet, steady gaze of someone who had heard doubt his entire life. And Craig saw something in those eyes he didn't expect. Compassion, not pity. Just calm understanding. Like Leo could see through the layers of fear and insecurity hiding behind his aggression. Then Dr. Mercer spoke again, cutting the tension like a blade. "With your permission, I'd like to run the full ignition sequence, with Leo's adjustment in place." Craig didn't respond. But it didn't matter. The tide had already turned. The room shifted as Dr. Mercer's words settled into the air. Permission or not, the ignition sequence was about to begin. Leo stood near the main control panel, his posture calm, almost casual, as if what was happening was just another project in his basement workshop, not a multi-million-dollar test at one of the top aerospace companies in the country. The team began moving again, slowly at first, then with gathering focus. Systems were rechecked, safety lines cleared, protocols reset. Despite Craig's tightening jaw and stony silence, no one questioned the decision. Dr. Mercer was now in charge, at least for the night. Jim lingered just outside the safety line, still unsure whether he should be proud or terrified. He kept expecting someone to stop this, to pull Leo away, to restore the hierarchy, but no one did. "Pressure stable," called one technician. Coolant flow nominal, said another dot. Leo stood by the console, watching the data flicker across the screens. He pointed to a graph. That drop right there happens 7 seconds before ignition. It's been misread as a heatsink lag, but it's the regulator response delay. Happens because of the jammed gear. That should normalize now. The team around him murmured agreement. Even the most skeptical faces now bore shades of reluctant admiration. Finally, Dr. Mercer gave the nod. Ignition in 10. The countdown was quiet. 10.9, 8, 7. Leo watched, motionless, his hands folded in front of him. 6, 5, 4. The hangar lights dimmed slightly as auxiliary systems transferred power. 3, 2, 1, and then, it happened. A low rumble rolled through the floor, deep and steady, not the sputtering choke of previous tests, not the ear-splitting screech of combustion failure. This was different, smooth, clean, powerful. The engine came, alive like a living thing, pulsing with precision. It held steady. Every number held. Cheers erupted before anyone could stop them. Engineers clapped each other on the backs, some shaking their heads in disbelief. One woman even wiped her eyes. Dr. Mercer stared at the monitor, stunned. It's perfect. And at the edge of it all, Craig Ellison stood frozen, lips parted just slightly, eyes fixed on the machine he no longer understood. Leo turned back toward his father and smiled just a little. Jim let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. In the chaos of celebration, no one noticed. Leo leaned quietly toward Dr. Mercer and asked, "Do you have a backup of the original regulator design logs?" That single question would ripple far beyond this hangar. The sound was mesmerizing, deep, even alive. The engine had never run this clean. For weeks, it had sputtered and died at ignition, grinding confidence into dust. But now, the hum was steady, like a heart finding its rhythm. No anomalies. Number, warning lights. Just pure, calibrated power. It was the kind of moment engineers lived for. Years of study and experience culminated in a single, roaring affirmation. It works. A few of the younger team members let out whoops of joy, throwing their arms in the air. Others stood in stunned silence, watching as the data streamed across the monitors, too shocked to speak. They weren't just watching a machine, they were witnessing a shift in reality. Everything they thought they knew about the failure had just been rewritten by a teenage boy in thrift store sneakers. Dr. Mercer's voice broke through the chaos. "Mark everything, log it. I want full diagnostics stored and triple backed up. This isn't just a breakthrough, it's a correction." Jim leaned against the far wall, his legs finally giving a little under the weight of the moment. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding everything inside: his pride, his fear, his hope. Now it all poured out in a single, disbelieving exhale. He felt his eyes sting but didn't wipe them. Not yet. Craig Ellison, however, was a statue. He hadn't moved since the test began. No applause, no words. Just a hard, unblinking stare. His world, the one built on authority, predictability, and control, had just been cracked open by someone outside the hierarchy. And worse, it happened without him. He walked slowly toward the engine, keeping his distance like it might bite. As he circled the machine, he found nothing to challenge. Every gauge confirmed the truth. Leo had fixed it, flawlessly, without clearance, without a team, without him. Leo stepped away from the panel and watched the group with a faint, curious expression, like he was more interested in their reactions than the machine itself. Then, from the corner of the room, one of the senior engineers raised a question. "How did you even know where to look?" Leo paused. "The oscillation in the third stage injector didn't match the pressure dips. I figured if the inputs were stable, but the response lagged, something was restricting the response pathway. That gear was the only part hidden enough to be overlooked." Dr. Mercer blinked. "You figured all that out in 20 minutes? Leo tilted his head. "More like 18. There was a beat of silence, then laughter, nervous and real. But Craig wasn't laughing. He turned and walked away, disappearing down the corridor without a word. Leo didn't even notice. He had just spotted something else, something in the backup data Mercer had pulled, a pattern, a signature he recognized, and it was enough to make his eyes narrow, just slightly. What he saw next would explain everything. The hangar was quiet again, except this time, the silence was reverent. The engine had powered down flawlessly. Every system checked out. And Leo, he was now seated at a side station, flipping through the archived regulator schematics, like he'd worked there for years. Dr. Mercer hovered nearby, both eager and hesitant to speak. "What is it?" he finally asked, watching Leo's eyes scan the screen. Leo tapped the display. "Here, this part of the regulator. The housing was revised 6 months ago, but not for performance." Mercer frowned. "What do you mean?" "The change wasn't to improve flow, it was to lower production costs. Cheaper materials. The burr wasn't a fluke. It's a flaw built into the redesign." The weight of the words settled like concrete. Dr. Mercer looked pale. Craig approved. "That spec revision." Leo didn't nod. He didn't need to. Before Mercer could say more, one of the assistants jogged over, holding out a phone. You need to take this. It's him, who Elon Musk." The name dropped like a stone. Heads turned. Leo didn't react. He took the phone without ceremony, holding it lightly in his grit-smudged hand. He didn't say hello, just waited. On the other end, the voice was unmistakable, even through the tinny speaker. "Is this Leo Carter?" "Yes." A pause. Then, "I saw the ignition footage. They sent it to me. I watched it 6 times. Leo stayed silent. Another pause. Then the voice cracked. I've never seen that kind of instinct. Not from a kid, not from anyone. I don't know how to explain it, but you fixed something none of us could even see. You have no idea what this means." The breath hitched, and just like that, Elon Musk, a visionary billionaire disruptor, was crying. On the phone, in front of half a dozen engineers and a teenage boy who'd never set foot in a college classroom. Leo's voice, when it came, was soft. It was never about proving something. "I just couldn't watch something so beautiful stay broken." A long silence followed. Then Elon asked, voice steadier now, "Would you consider joining us? I'll send a jet, a team, whatever you need." Leo looked across the hangar to where his father stood, still too stunned to move. He didn't answer right away, because what came next wasn't about rocket engines at all. Leo didn't respond right away. The phone, still warm in his hand, seemed heavier now. Elon Musk's words echoed in his ears, an invitation most people would have sold their souls to receive. A private jet, a seat at the table, access to the bleeding edge of innovation. But Leo didn't move, not yet. He glanced at his father. Jim stood just inside the circle of engineers, arms still at his sides, eyes wide with disbelief, pride, and something else, fear. The kind of fear that comes from a lifetime of being overlooked, of knowing what it means to be expendable. Leo raised the phone to his ear again. "Mr. Musk, I'm here. I'm grateful, really. But before I say yes, I need to ask you something, anything. Do you have a program that invests in kids like me? People who never got a shot, who don't come from money or prestige, but could build something extraordinary if they just had the space." There was a pause. "I don't mean internships," Leo added. "I mean real infrastructure. Teaching labs in low-income neighborhoods, mentors who don't just lecture, but listen. Kids like me are everywhere. We don't need handouts. We need tools, belief." The line went silent for a beat. Then Musk spoke, voice rough but clear. "No, not yet. But we can." Leo nodded to himself. "Then I'll join you. But that's the condition. We don't build rockets unless we build access to." The call ended not with a deal, but a mission. Hours later, as dawn stretched across the sky, Leo sat beside his father on the hood of their car. The hangar behind them was still buzzing, but out here, everything was quiet. "You didn't have to do that," Jim said softly. Leo shrugged. "Yeah, I did." Jim turned to him. "You could have just taken the job, lived your dream." Leo looked out across the horizon. "This isn't just my dream. It never was." He didn't say it, but he didn't have to. The way he looked at his father said enough. For every night Jim stood guard, unseen and unthanked. Leo had watched, and remembered. Far above them, a faint streak of vapor trailed across the morning sky, a sign of another test, another launch, another beginning. But this one had a new kind of fuel. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And which part of Leo's journey stayed with you the most? We read every single comment, and your words mean the world.